Even now, at the start of the 21st century, for all our advances, we still haven't eliminated the scourge of war.
In fact, the last 100 years have seen war waged on a greater scale than at any other time in human history.
In this new series, my son Dan and I will be examining some of the greatest battles of the 20th century. Battles that have shaped the world we live in today. We'll fly to the Pacific to find out how America turned the tide against Japan. We'll see what remains of the ravaged city of Stalingrad. We'll go to the Far East to visit the battlefields of Vietnam and the front line of the ongoing conflict in Korea, still unresolved to this day. We'll travel to the Falkland Islands, scene of the last war on British territory, and journey to the Middle East to describe battles and grounds of northern France and Belgium. And Verdun, further down the Western Front, had resulted in a catastrophic loss of life on both sides, but the front line had hardly moved. To break this deadlock, there would have to be a startling change in Germany's last chance to win the war. Even with freed-up German troops flooding in from the east, Ludendorff still didn't have the manpower to launch a general offensive all along the Western Front. So he decided to focus on one part of the line. If he could push the British back into the sea, the French in just one day. In Ludendorff, the Germans had a strong commander with a clear battle plan. On the Allied side, there was no man in overall charge. The British were led by Field Marshal Douglas Haig. He rarely saw eye to eye with the French Chief of Staff, General Ferdinand Foch. And now there was also the American commander, General John Pershing.
They were Ludendorff's elite, the stormtroopers.
Was a critical point in the race against time.
That would mark the tip of the German advance towards Paris. Control of it gave the Germans a key strategic foothold on the road to the French capital. If the Allies were to prevent Ludendorff from strutting down the Champs-Élysées, the German stronghold in Belleau Wood would have to be cleared.
Clearing Belleau Wood had been given to the United States Marine Corps. For the first time in World War I, the Americans were going on the offensive. Even though it had been 14 months since the United States had declared war on Germany, this had not... But the advancing Marines were in for a nasty shock. Some of the Marines fought their way through the machine gun fire and managed to establish a small foothold in this forest, but it cost them terrible casualties. Elsewhere on the battlefield, one young American officer was told to retreat by some French troops that were pulling back. He famously said, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here."
In their first encounter with the Germans, the US Marine Corps suffered 10,000 casualties.
Didn't have computers or satellites to help them find the right range. Normally, before a battle, they would fire off test shots, but before the Battle of Amiens, they were ordered to use only maps and mathematics so as not to alert the Germans.
457 mil.
A battery can drop something like 4.5 tons of explosives.
Behind the first enemy line. He gave them 2 hours to reach it. There, they'd consolidate, and new forces would pass through them and fight their way through to the red line, which he marked 3 miles further on. And if by the end of the day they could then reach his blue line, they would have achieved an 8-mile advance altogether. It would be the biggest advance in one day's fighting of any Allied force on the Western Front since the war began.
In early August, Amiens was a ghost town. The population had been
A mass of troops and tanks moved forward under the barrage.
The taking of this village of Marcel-Cave put the Canadians across Rawlinson's first objective, his Green Line.
British soldiers operating north of the River Somme had been given less distance to cover because they were fighting on rougher terrain. But about 3 tanks had pressed on at a heady 8 miles an hour, causing havoc behind enemy lines.
The exploits of one of these tanks, nicknamed Musical Box, would pass into legend. For 9 hours it ran wild, attacking German artillery from the rear, surprising resting German troops, and even ramming a truck.
It was going to be the end of the war.
Ludendorff lost more ground to the Allies on the first day of the Battle of Amiens than on almost any other day.
After more than 4 years of fighting and 15 million dead, the guns were now silent.
And rivalries that would plague the world for the rest of the 20th century.
But the darkest legacy of the First World War began in a military hospital where a corporal